Deep fat frying is a multi-phase physiochemical unit operation. While it involves submerging food in hot fat, the process is a complex interaction of thermodynamics, hydrodynamics, and structural chemistry. The process is defined by high-temperature dehydration. This occurs through a continuous exchange of heat and mass between the oil and the food. Successful frying produces a dehydrated, structurally stable, and shatteringly crisp exterior. This shell protects the interior as it cooks. Achieving this state requires a categorization of the thermodynamic mechanisms and molecular transformations occurring within the fryer. The final crust is a specific structural state determined by these physical laws. When a cold substrate enters oil maintained between 175 and 190 degrees Celsius, it creates a thermal energy gradient. Energy transfers to the food surface via forced convection. Convective heat flux defines this initial energy transfer. Heat hits the boundary layer first, then moves inward through conduction, warming the cooler core. The bubbling observed upon immersion is the release of evaporated water from within the cellular matrix. It is a signal of the food dehydrating, rather than the oil itself boiling. Internal moisture reaches 100 degrees Celsius and converts from liquid to gas. During this phase change, water expands to approximately 1,600 times its original physical size. This expansion forces vapor to jet through the microscopic capillary pathways of the crust, creating a high-velocity positive pressure gradient. This outward pressure acts as a physical shield. As long as active vaporization occurs, the force repels hydrophobic lipids, preventing them from entering the surface. The food is shielded from oil penetration during the active frying phase. It cooks internally in its own juices, while the exterior surface dehydrates. Simultaneous to this mass transfer, a chemical sequence begins. As the internal temperature reaches between 55 and 85 degrees Celsius, the molecular scaffolding of the crust forms. Starch gelatinization begins as crystalline granules absorb native moisture. They swell and rupture to form a continuous gel network. As surface temperatures exceed the boiling point of water, the heat boils the plasticizing moisture out of this newly formed gel network. Stripped of water, the starch matrix undergoes a phase transition into a rigid, brittle, glass-like state. Concurrent to these starch transformations, surface proteins unfold and coagulate. They build a three-dimensional scaffolding that holds the starch in place against the turbulence of the escaping steam. This structural glass transition is the physical origin of crispness. It is the result of the preceding gelatinization and protein denaturation phases. This chart classifies coating systems used in frying. Final porosity depends on the taxonomic category. Wet batters establish an immediate thermal barrier. Energy-triggering vaporization puffs the batter outward, creating a vapor void protecting the core while leaving a smooth shell. The dry dredge system lacks external liquid, relying on native water exudation to trigger hydration, yielding an ultra-thin shattering matrix. The standard breading matrix utilizes mechanical interlocking via a three-phase sequence: a dry flour primer, a protein binder, and a macroscopic outer crumb. This textured outer crumb increases the surface area exposed to the oil. That geometry accelerates convective heat transfer while generating acoustic crunch. The tempura system is an outlier, defined by its reliance on thermal shock and gluten inhibition. Using ice-cold liquids and undermixing the flour prevents a gluten web from forming. Expanding steam bubbles burst the batter into fragile dendritic formations, resembling shattered glass. The mechanical and thermal interaction between the coating and the oil dictates whether the texture is a protective crunch or a lacy shatter. To engineer these structural outcomes, practitioners manipulate specific variables. Relying exclusively on standard all-purpose wheat flour can result in a leathery crust. Wheat flour contains protein that forms elastic gluten networks. To dilute these networks, practitioners use a 5:3 ratio of wheat flour to high amylose starch. These starches interrupt gluten strands and require higher temperatures to gelatinize, ensuring a more rigid glass transition during dehydration. Control over hydration volatiles further alters the results. Substituting water with 80-proof vodka or carbonated beer changes the thermodynamics of the evaporation phase. Ethanol boils at 78 degrees Celsius. Alcohol-laced batters dehydrate faster, setting the crust without overcooking the core. Injected carbon dioxide provides nucleation sites for steam. These bubbles aerate the matrix from the inside out, creating a porous scaffolding. While often assumed the alcohol evaporates, Ethanol forms azeotropic bonds with water. Testing confirms approximately 40% of the alcohol remains trapped in the matrix. For high-moisture substrates, the double fry method manages the thermal timeline. A 160-degree blanch extracts water, an ambient rest redistributes internal moisture, and a 190-degree flash fry forces the final glass transition. Achieving a flawless crust is mathematical formulation. Altering hydration volatility, protein ratios, and thermal timelines fundamentally overrides the native structural limitations of the ingredients. If the steam barrier repels lipids during the fry, why do many fried foods suffer catastrophic structural failure, resulting in a heavy, greasy crust? Data from high-speed 4D computed tomography shows that up to 80% of total oil absorption occurs after the food is removed from the fryer. As ambient air cools the substrate, the internal steam that provided the outward pressure barrier condenses back into liquid water. This volumetric phase change generates a negative pressure gradient. It creates a vacuum effect within the internal pores of the crust. The vacuum initiates capillary action, drawing the residual surface oil into the dehydrated voids of the starch matrix. If fried food rests on a flat surface, escaping steam hits the surface and condenses. This moisture is reabsorbed, softening the glass-like starch polymers into a flaccid state. Degraded oil yields greasy food due to increased viscosity. Thermal cycling causes triglyceride molecules to polymerize into thicker chains that cling to the crust, leaving more oil for the vacuum effect to pull inward. Engineering a crust in the fire is ineffective if post-frying mass transfer and residual thermodynamics are mishandled during cooling. Advanced practitioners analyze the visual and acoustic emissions of the crust as indicators of thermodynamic progress. The acoustic sizzle of the fryer is the physical shockwave generated by millions of vapor cavities collapsing under thermal stress. Escaping water droplets manifest in distinct topographies. Explosion cavities eject aerosol mist, elongated cavities shoot vapor jets downward, and oscillating cavities pulsate before fracturing. The pitch and frequency of the sizzle indicate the rate of moisture loss. A drop in acoustic emission is the signal, but the active boiling phase has ceased and the pressure barrier is fading. Deep fat frying is a microscopic interaction of thermal energy, vapor pressure, and polymer chemistry. Success requires adherence to these physical laws to achieve a precise structural result.